All right, everybody, welcome. We're going to do another little gun show and tell podcast. It seemed as though enough people enjoyed our last one of just kind of random, obscure guns that we had around our safes here. Figured we'd talk about them, give a little history. Again, just who doesn't, if you're into hunting and shooting, just guns are cool. They're manufacturing and engineering feats, and it's fun to marvel at them. You know, as much as some people will say, you know, hey, I got this gun. It's just a tool. I'm just going to use it. I don't know. I can't imagine anybody out there who couldn't look back at some of these interesting firearms in history and not just think, man, that's cool. And so we've sort of narrowed our sights this time on some older firearms. Originally, we were saying amongst ourselves, oh, what if we got like kind of all World War II firearms? You know, you'll find that we're not exactly sticking strictly to World War II here as we go on, but some interesting firearms from around that time period. And as Ryan Muckenhirn here called it, what do you call it? The glory days, or what was it? When times were
better.
Pre-cell phone. We'll get into that. One thing I should mention is that on the table in front of me, and if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it. We have, if you ever watch Top Gear, and they go on these trips, and you know each host will pick a car that they're in love with for whatever reason for usually 1,000 quid, they say. Oh, those Brits. They have to travel across some country or whatever, and inevitably one of them breaks down and gets all bent out of shape. Well, they have a backup car, and it's always like the worst car ever that everybody hates. Well, I brought a backup gun, and I'm not saying that everybody hates this gun, but if you look at it from afar, you would say, oh my gosh, they've got an STG-44. The Sturmgewehr.
That is exactly what I said in the parking lot this morning when
right.
I saw you walking in.
Right. But alas, this is a replica in 22 long rifle, which is cool, but not quite, legit actual STG from Germany. 44 cool.
A lot of style points, though.
A lot of style points. But that's the backup gun in case anybody forgot one. Mark.
I didn't forget one. I didn't have access to one.
Right. It's back at the old Washington home.
It is. That's actually, you could say it's not even mine. It's my father's.
Right.
And that's why he has it.
Well, who wants to kick this one off? Because we got some cool stuff. Let's just, as a preview of some of the guns we're going to talk about, Ryan Muckenhirn, who might just have to start because he looks very excited, is holding an M1 Garand. We also have which Springfield is this?
That's the 03 Springfield, the M1. The M1 Springfield that predated the Garand.
Okay. I have brought along my Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark I with an asterisk. Ian brought something that's in a case right now. We haven't even seen it yet.
Oh, man.
It's a 98. It's a Mauser 98. Kind of a weird
Sweet.
one.
Oh,
okay.
Yep.
All right.
2-axis power guns enter this room.
Mark may be representing slightly the backup gun, which he might know nothing about, but it seemed like Ryan knew a little bit about, and Adam. But you then also from afar, from a distance, will be representing, what is this, Spanish-American?
So what I didn't bring along is a U.S. Army 1893 45-70.
Okay. Excellent.
Nice.
Lovely. All right.
That was used in the Spanish-American War, not World War II.
Okay. Well, Mr. Muckenhirn is being directed by the MC of Ryan's.
I think I'm doing it right.
Are you doing better now? Okay. So we're going to talk about this M1 Garand. How do you not talk about, World War II or just older, awesome rifles? Again, not necessarily sticking to specifically World War II, without talking about the M1 Garand.
Well, I think maybe not to contradict you
are
there,
you
but
gonna,
like...
Are you going to say we go in order and maybe start with...
Because, see, that's what's interesting about this time period for me, especially from the small arms point of view, is during World War II, we kind of saw the harnessing of gas power and putting, semi-automatic and full automatic capability into like a handheld package.
Mm-hmm.
So that evolved through... belt-fed machine guns from World War I.
I was thinking of the same thing.
Yeah, and you got
on my way to work this morning.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of this is when we saw the squad automatic.
Yeah, because you have sub guns rapidly evolving.
Basically being made out of like car mufflers and random parts people found.
Well, right, and that's the other thing that's interesting. As the war goes on, we go from because you got to for historical context, we're coming out of the Great Depression in a time of craftsmen. And then as we're going through the Great Depression, like, man, if you had a job, you were trying really hard to keep it. So you wanted to be a really good craftsman. So like the guns that were made at the beginning of the war were really intricate. Example would be the Luger.
Okay.
The German Luger would be a very good example of that.
Now that's the pistol
That's
that has
the
the
9mm
crazy looking action
top
that
cock.
kind of like looks like a bridge as it folds up
Like
to
a drawbridge
underneath. Yeah.
It's a really good, I've never heard ever anybody refer to it as a drawbridge. It's exactly how it works.
That's how it works, though.
It's a drawbridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the Thompson submachine gun, the Tommy gun.
Oh yeah.
Very intricate, very well made. As the war went on, came the grease gun.
Yep.
Like some extrusion.
Still a pretty special gun, though.
Yeah, and so like
M3A1 is pretty rad rig.
resources got limited.
Is that
and-
different from the M1 carbine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
And then, so in the case of service rifles, like we have here, we have 3 samples of World War I-esque service rifles, what everybody had when the conflict started. And then that evolved into semi-automatic and then assault rifle capabilities. So,
Like this STG
yeah. And
44 here.
and really, since Ian has a Mauser, that's probably the one to
magazine.
start with, because a lot of these were actually knockoffs of the Mauser.
Okay. Remove the magazine so people who watch on YouTube don't.
So this
Never
one,
heard yet.
we're starting with the Mauser 98. But this is kind of interesting. This is a little bit different. So what happened was, after Germany surrenders, you've got all these craftsmen like Adam was alluding to, but now their gun factories are all bombed out, right? And obviously they don't have a commercial market to really cater to. And they're living in their country is occupied. So they've got these US GIs that are occupying their country. And they take advantage of that situation, the GIs do. And they trade what they have to barter, which is usually, chocolate or cigarettes, something like that. So this is what's called a cigarette rifle. So what they did was they'd go to a gunsmith and they'd say, hey, I found this 98 in theater. I want you to make my version of a custom deer hunting rifle that I can take back to the States. So that's what this is. This is a traditional 98 Mauser. The guy who commissioned it wanted a pretty interesting cartridge. It's chambered in something. It's a 4140.
Yes, dude.
So if you check out the hole in the pipe, it's a pretty thin wall barrel.
Yeah,
it's
that
a
is.
giant hole in there.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wild.
So what's even weirder about this is he said, hey, he probably said, I'm used to this Winchester 1873 in 3840. I want something like that, but I want it to be a bolt action. So this is actually magazine it's got a tube magazine.
What?
Yeah, it's crazy. So the gunsmith who did this, he built an elevator system like you'd find in the predecessor, the Mauser 71. And it's had a rough life. I mean, whoever, acquired it later in life thought maybe the magazine looked weird, so they removed the tube. It originally extended out maybe all the way to the end of the barrel. Or
you can actually
there.
see a line too on the barrel where it extends, where there might have been a band that wrapped around for structure.
That's exactly what it was. So there used to be a band that that held that tubular magazine in place. Probably incorporated the front sling swivel up there as well. So right now it's just a 3-shot. The internal tube goes to about here. The external tube is now missing. It'd make a cool project to restore someday,
Yeah.
But it's a 3-shot, 4140.
What is the deal with that cartridge?
It's weird, right? I mean, the 4440 is almost a straight wall. This is halfway in between like a 3840 and a 4440. So it shoots a 41 caliber bullet. This is a 225 grain hard cast, but actually make these out of, or Dad makes these out of 303 British brass. So
Really?
yeah, he uses a pipe cutter and he cuts them in half or to length. And the thicker brass lets him load, a little bit stiffer pressures. So you're achieving about, with this 225 grain bullet, it's probably 1450 feet per second. So
She's
kind of
moving
like a
quick.
Yeah, it's like a 41 Remington Magnum.
Yes.
Out of a.
I've got to say, in all the cool guns I've seen in this kind of fashion,
Yeah.
That's probably one of the coolest.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is super weird.
Is the definition of weird. So for people just listening too, let's try and give them a good visual image of what this is. Ian, you have proven once again to have brought in yet another svelte, nice. This is just this rifle when you hold it, it just looks handy.
Yeah,
Like it just looks, it's nice and thin. It's not bulky by any means. It has, you talk about that craftsmanship, and it has so much of that evident on it. It's got, these iron sights, the rear sights out on the barrel there, and the front iron sights up near the end.
Yeah, real traditional in the Germanic style. It's got a single island, high force soldered onto, or silver soldered onto the barrel with a flip up long and close range sight. I don't know what long range would be for a 41 Magnum, probably a buck 25 or something like that.
Yeah.
But,
It's
traditional
got all
rust
this
bluing.
unique. How would they have done the machining here on the receiver where they just have? I mean, it's just all it is a design. It just looks really nice. There's really no functional purpose to some of these little just lines that they've carved into the receiver.
Well, this is probably as far as cigarette rifles go. They didn't have a factory anymore to work out of, so these are guys that are doing a lot of hand filing now, more so than they would have been before. But they're skilled, like Adam was saying. They're good at their trade, and they're trying to make a living now in this occupied nation. So this would have been the several months directly following the end of the war. So kind of a neat period.
How is the magazine loaded? Does it load up through the ejection port, or
it loads through the injection port down like you would be like a lever action, only it's down through the internal magazine,
down through the top of the gun,
and then this little button here is actually the magazine cutoff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So explain a magazine cutoff. I just learned about that when I was researching mine that I brought in, actually.
Yeah, so it basically enables or disables the mechanics that are the feeding mechanism within the magazine.
So you could isn't it such that you could have you could shoot a shot and then eject that case without bringing a new one in?
Yep, for whatever reason, training.
Or they could clear the chamber without emptying the magazine.
Yeah.
They're coming into camp or something like that.
Crossing a fence.
Crossing a fence, exactly. So you could take the round out of the chamber, but you still had a full magazine. If a firefight were to erupt, you could. You didn't have to completely unload the whole rifle.
Right, because we didn't have detachable box magazines at this point in time.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Wow.
So not
Probably
the
a
best.
pretty handy feature for a gun of conflict, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
Non-standard though. That wouldn't have existed on the.
Right.
So this
right.
guy had to, whoever made this rifle, they had to engineer all this, even down, like you said, they had to make this lifter and this magazine cutoff and everything. And right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
And
this is fantastic.
This is back in the day when people just had to figure stuff out and just manipulate metal and just.
And they had a bunch of these. They were a dime a dozen to get them. So if you screwed it up, you just threw it away and got another one.
And now people just fawn over it.
Yeah.
I'm taken aback by that. I have seen some super cool similar rifles, like interesting weird hybridizations in sporterized rigs. Nothing that cool.
Yeah,
ever.
you see a lot of sporterized Mausers,
and sometimes done like really cool, like 20 gauges were unpopular and things like that. But a tube fed bolt action 41 for any rimmed pistol cartridge.
Right. And imagine it was probably a 10 shot capacity.
I'm thinking of the cowboy from back home who came over and he's like, here's the deal. My pops has got an 1873. I want that in the bolt action. I want it done like that.
That's the Winchester magazine too, essentially,
Yeah, that's and then the gentleman who's going to put this thing together going,
That's all they can say over there.
And he blows it out of the water. That is one of the coolest pieces of hand fitting and firearms pioneering I've seen.
It's got the traditional, pancake cheek piece, pressed horn butt plate. It needs a little bit of TLC. It's missing the set trigger that we discussed last go around.
Oh, it had the set trigger like the Sauron, or what was that, Sauron?
Yeah, the JP Sauron. Yep. But so that can be retrofitted and brought back to original.
Now, are some of these things you mentioned, like the TLC items, is that something that you would intend to do at some point? Because, you're kind of a craftsman, or is that something you would send it to somebody who specializes in these? Or
Yeah, I think it deserves the restoration. I'd probably do it myself. It wouldn't be the first or the last. It's just, how these projects go. They end up piling up, and you have like half a dozen of them back in your workshop in 1 year. You might get to it. So if Dad passes it on to someone else before I get to it, that's just fine, as long as there's someone who might tackle that project too.
How do you begin to even tackle a project like that, like restoring an old firearm like this? When I look at it, it's just so baffling. Like, it's not as though you can just go on to Mauser's website and download a PDF of that exact gun and start, re-envisioning it or whatever. You gotta go in and almost start thinking like whoever was making it back at that time was thinking. And
it's no longer Legos. Legos are cool, but like this is, you draw a line between, okay, now you've got to make parts instead of like figure out just how to shoehorn them in.
Yeah.
So you have to be interested in woodworking, interested in metalworking, but it's not for the faint of heart, definitely.
Oh,
it's for an engineer.
Restoring it sounds
like that.
Yeah, for sure. Restoring it sounds super cool. You can kind of bring it back to its original form. But man, like I look at this as it stands right now and just all the conversations we've had, and it tells such a story as it is. Like it's almost like you'd be almost removing part of its important history. I don't know. Like I would be personally conflicted of whether to do that or not do that.
Yeah, there's probably a line you could draw. I mean, like for example, like is putting in the original set trigger that it would have had back then, is that actually making it more like it was, or
Well, regardless of any of that, you can still use it, shoot it, hunt with it today. So
have you hunted
maybe
with
that's
this
the best. No, I haven't. I think Dad has. He made some real cat sneeze type loads for squirrels and small game and stuff. But
where do you make this bullet?
Yeah, he cast those 225 grain hard cast, and then he just makes the shell out of a 303 British.
I think Jimmy's kind of fascinated by the semi-wad cutter bullet. Is that what? Have you ever seen one with a shoulder like that?
No.
So that bullet is essentially, it's a cast lead bullet, so it'll mushroom when it hits stuff because it's not very hard, but it's got a hard shoulder to it, so when it hits a piece of paper, it actually cuts it like an X-Acto knife instead of punching through and tearing a hole in the paper. For competition target shooting, it cuts a perfectly clean hole because you get a better scored hit. That's where that bullet shape comes from.
So the bullet, it almost looks like a like a bundt cake.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was thinking like crayon.
But then it's got
bundt cake.
But then it's got well, and actually even when you say crayon too, like crayons come down, then they kind of shoulder out, and then they go down the
yes.
That's so
I'd
good.
call it an upside down flower pot.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you have it. That's pretty much darn right exactly what it is. That's so cool.
Yep. So I got to ask a question of Ian, because Ian's one of the coolest people I've ever met. Ian's father shows up sometimes on social media, having done cool things as well. Is your dad a German immigrant, or is he a first-generation American German?
Yeah, so he's like third generation German, but his great-grandfather came to my hometown where I was born and set up a bakery. So we've all just sort of stayed there. Yeah.
That's so cool. This is, again, another phenomenal piece of history by Ian Klemm.
How about the Mauser action? Like looking at this gun and you have the bolt out right now, and I mean, like the list of manufacturers who still use that action.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were just looking at Kimber's in the range right now.
Yep.
Look so similar, and there's so many other ones where
Enfield,
this
Springfield,
essentially
all derivatives of the Mauser.
You know what? You bring up a good point. Yeah, you can tell that they're all derivatives.
I mean, essentially, nothing's new in this world, right? We were stealing intellectual property before the Chinese were, because the 03 Springfield is a knockoff of the Mauser.
Yep.
We came out of or into World War I, and we didn't have a service rifle that could do that. Ours, we had the 3040 Krag at the time.
What is it that this could do that was so amazing? It was just they
could load it with a clip. So a clip, not a magazine, but they had cartridges clipped together, and they would push it down in there, and then and then they would close it.
So you see this cutout in the rear bridge right here that would accept that clip.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Also present on the 1903. Also present on the 19.
Yeah.
The Lee Enfield.
Gosh, that is so awesome.
So essentially, we made our own Americanized Mauser, and that was the 03 Springfield.
Is that where we go next logically from here?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so Peter Paul Mauser, that what 1893,
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
1891. What was the first Mauser?
This is when was the original Mauser cartridge. That was a black powder cartridge too.
1885. I don't even know. I have to look it up. Google that. Yeah. So yeah, Peter Paul Mauser could have been, credited with the modern turn bolt.
Yeah.
Still lives on to this day. Kimber, Winchester, Montana.
And it's evolved, rear lug to front lug and different things like that. But that's where it started.
Cock on close, cock on open.
It really makes you think, and we mentioned this the last time we were doing a podcast like this, but it makes you think. It's like so many people. You had John Moses Browning. You had even Lee here, or whatever, with this Lee Enfield, but Mauser. Some of these dudes back in the day that were coming up with these inventions, and they came up with a lot of inventions. Look at the list of John Moses Browning alone. The stuff that guy made, and stuff that's still in use today. And it's kind of like people are just, they're adding on and they're making tweaks, but it's not often that somebody comes along and really makes something totally different.
Well, and that's interesting too. You think at the rate technology changes, right?
Yeah.
But these things are still
I think it's
machine
because
gun,
the way to go.
I think
a
a lot of times the reason why people see things today and they're like, wow, it just seems like, back in the day to get this kind of technological advancement would have taken 20, 30 years, and now it happens in 2 or 3 months. And it's like, yeah, but the base was laid, It's like you have this huge foundation now to work off nowadays where you can then just make these little branches off that are new and, but anyway, I just think that's pretty sweet, but... The Springfield is next.
Yep. So 03 Springfield. This is coming out of World War I. So if we're going back to World War II rifles, this is what was in inventory from World War I when the United States entered the war, and then in the 20s, the United States Army expressed an interest in a semi-automatic infantry rifle, and that's when the trials were held for what would ultimately become the M1 Garand. The Garand went up against another rifle known as the Peterson for the trials, but the Garand ultimately won out.
And the Johnson.
Yeah, and the Johnson as well.
Garand sounds much more.
I got it for the video. I'll hold this while you talk and explain.
But
see this
basically, we kind of also talked about the Luger already. If you're trying to picture the Peterson, I had to look it up to kind of figure out something to say about it. But it essentially worked on a similar toggle action to the Luger, but ultimately its downfall, which lost out to the Garand, was it required lubricated ammunition to work properly. So they actually had to cake on like this wax. It was kind of like what comes on a Dixie cup on the ammunition, so that it would have the proper lubrication to cycle, because it would start trying to extract the cartridge while the barrel was still pressurized.
Oh, really?
But the heat from ignition would melt the wax, and that was the proper amount of lubrication that it needed without being sticky or anything to attract dirt. But the Ordnance Corps ultimately didn't like that they had to have lubricated ammunition. The Garand would function without lubricated ammunition, so it won the trial.
Very interesting. This is just such a cool rifle in so many ways, because so what was the primary? So this was when you say a service rifle, this is pretty much what everyone was given.
Yep. If synonymous today with, well, today would be M4. Yeah. M16, M4. Like if you're going to if you're an infantryman that shoots at people, this is what you got.
To think that mentioning this rifle and the M16 and the M4 in the same sentence.
Right.
It's baffling. Can you imagine dudes nowadays fighting with bolt actions?
Yeah. Well,
like even close quarters.
Yeah.
And a 30-06.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. A full power 30-06.
That accepts.
Is that what this is chambered?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That accepts a bayonet that's like 18 inches long.
That has a stock with a straight grip to facilitate using that bayonet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So explain. Can we talk about the 30-06?
God's cartridge.
God's cartridge. Hell yeah.
Break it down,
guy
man.
himself.
Can we
Start. Hey, actually,
this
good
is
good question.
potentially, I don't want to hog this thing too. If
So
anybody else wants to
the
take this.
original in the 30-06 was the 3003, 30 caliber 1903, which
Double it. That's what they say.
which was originally chambered in a 1903.
Okay.
And then they modified, I think, the bullet weight and a little bit of the neck profile, a couple other small case dimensions to come up with the 30-06. So caliber 30, US 1906, abbreviated to 30-06.
Oh, that's where the 06 comes from?
Correct,
Okay.
yep.
I see.
And that was that's where that came out.
Parent cartridge to the 308 and many other cartridges,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Like what other cartridges?
270 Winchester, 280
280.
Remington.
Yeah. 25-06.
Yep.
That's so cool.
338-06. 35 Whalen.
35 Whalen. Yep.
Yeah. Really, I mean, and if you really want to get crazy, I mean, anything that's based on a 308 is based on an
True.
06.
Yeah. It's like a great grandfather, if you will.
Yep. The greatest grandfather.
The greatest. This has, so as far as technology goes, you know, this has, as far as the rear sight, it's got one of those ladder
type, yep.
elevations type rear sights. It's got, I thought I just peeked at that front sight quickly. That's actually or is it adjustable, or would you consider it
windage,
that? Or,
yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
windage adjustable. It's like a pistol sight with a dovetail,
Yeah.
Yes.
which is pretty interesting. Is that how you would adjust? Is that how one would adjust their windage when zeroing?
Yeah, gross windage.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Big swings.
And so this Lee Enfield here has this as well. I don't know about the M1 because I didn't look at it. These elevation type rear sights where they look like a ladder with kind of a thing that slides up and down and gives you your point of aim. Yeah, I mean, it looks like something you'd see on a grenade launcher. It is, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Comes from World War I when they would shoot,
Volleys.
across no man's land
Yeah.
at each other. And then one of the things that you learned about in high school, World War II, was blitzkrieg. So now all of a sudden we weren't fighting in trenches anymore. It was more mobile warfare. So that's kind of archaic from World War I, but it was still present because the technology was evolving past that. I don't think the Garand has that.
The Garand does
as
not.
much.
Was that like the first BDC though? Oh, Mark.
Yeah.
Great.
bopping
Hey,
his
exactly.
mic over
Great.
there.
Yeah,
that was like
that's
the
a great
first
comparison.
BDC reticle
Yeah.
because what they had to have tuned that to that particular load out of generally speaking. And this is a perfect example of why we talk about when we talk about BDC reticles. I can only imagine that this isn't designed to be some super uber precise gun. It's a service rifle that's designed to be accurate enough.
Correct.
It's where Minute of Man came from.
Yeah, Minute of Man. There you go.
And so these BDCs, even though of course we know every rifle is different and every place that they would take these rifles to in combat would be different. They would essentially though try to come up with the average situation and the average rifle and the average muzzle velocity and things like that.
What does the elevator bring us out to on that one? 1,400?
It looks pretty optimistic. 2,700.
Oh man, can you imagine?
Gentlemen, they're at 2 miles. Engage.
They'll never see it coming.
You don't want to use your bayonet.
I wonder if there was a
Just
dual
raining
function
down.
with grenade launcher on there. Did they have a 1903 grenade launcher
That's an
option?
interesting question. Yeah.
You're just raining down 30-06 on people.
Yeah.
At that point,
And that rifle then evolved
they have
into
grenade
the
launchers in that.
They had
Yeah.
a grenade launcher that would fit on the end of the Garand.
No way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they would, and then the bullet would actually launch it.
Yeah. So it looked
You would shoot a bullet into a grenade?
it
Yeah.
looked like an RPG, like the nose cone of an RPG. So like cartoon grenade or cartoon rocket,
Yeah, okay.
quarter turn. And then there's a very particular, and I don't know the method of holding it and firing it. But yeah, you shot.
So how does your bullet not get stuck in the bore?
I believe it was a special round.
Or did you kind of just
I
have
don't
to
think it was,
tilt your rifle upside down?
That I
and
don't
shake
know.
it a
I
little bit?
don't know that it was
No,
a
I think it actually captures the projectile.
full service round. Like
Which is
really?
Yeah.
the projectile kind of mooshes into it.
Right.
and-
Same for like the door breaching special munitions that they had. Just
Okay.
they're trying to amplify the KE for like very, very modest range.
Gotcha.
Is KE kinetic energy?
Yeah, kinetic energy. Yep.
Nice.
Are you an engineer?
Well,
you should be.
aspiring.
Play one on TV.
That gun is just, I mean, that's cool. The safety is just like this big flag at the back, where you have this
Yep.
like plunger. That's your firing pin, or essentially, right?
Yep. The
And
back end of it, yeah.
And it just has this giant flag that goes from one side to the other. This also has the magazine
Cutoff switch.
What cutoff switch? We were trying to figure that out before we got it. We found this big lever off to the left side of the firearm. Now you would load. How much did this hold in the? You call that the magazine, but you loaded it with a clip.
Yeah.
How much did it hold?
I think 5.
5, yeah.
That is so cool. What's the deal with this? What's the story on this particular rifle?
So that
you
was
were saying that the acquisition method was interesting. Or
so some of the history behind some of these guns that we have, we at Vortex, maybe if you caught it on our social media on the 4th of July, we've assembled one arm from like a representative arm from most major U.S. conflicts, starting with the Revolutionary War. We've got a 1763 Charleville all the way up until a Mark 18. And so I wanted a World War I vintage rifle, and they're kind of hard to come by because that was a long time ago. And I called up my old boss, the guy who got me started into this industry, and I said, I need an honest 1903, and he laughed, and he says, I've had one in my basement for 35 years. And yeah, he bought it right before he went to, I believe, the Colorado School of Trades for gunsmithing. And it's a very, very, very clean 1903.
This is. Yeah.
You can actually see how it was stored over time. The oil and the goo and the cosmoline and everything else that was packed in it has just settled to the butt end of the stock.
Is that why it's darker?
Yeah,
down
and
here?
part of it, I mean, it was stored on a rack and undoubtedly near the floor. It's very clean. The bore is mint.
What is it? What is A057?
Would have been like the control or the lot number. So
Okay.
this rifle would have been as issued, as you see it. So like take it off the rack, give it to a GI, give it to a doughboy, and have him
Send it.
go fight the Kaiser. But yeah, very cool gun. I couldn't believe it when he said it, when he handed it to me. I worked for him for quite a while, for about 6.5 years, and he specialized in hard to find and mostly historical firearms. And I've never seen a 1903 that nice. And
Yeah, even like the parkerizing on the wear surfaces and everything isn't rubbed through yet.
No, it's a perfect kind of example of what it should be.
That's cool.
And so I said, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want to sell this to me, boss?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I can do nothing with it." So
Perfect.
So yeah, that's where we came up with this one. So he had it for a very, very, very long time. I mean, 35 years to sit and not do anything. I'm sure at one point in time I actually moved it and had no idea that I had moved it. But
Yeah.
Cool rig.
Now, before we get into, I feel like next we almost have to wait on the M1 in this order that we've gone, because now that's a semi-automatic. We're talking about these bolt guns. What do we do with Marks though? The Spanish American 45.
Well,
So
as per usual, Jim, I'm a complete mess.
Right. I see you have many papers printed and highlighted and things. We won't be able to show you this rifle on the YouTube video, but at least we can probably explain it. What's the gun again?
So when we came up with this idea, I knew that I didn't have any guns from WW2. So
or just an older time period.
Yep. And so I chatted with my father.
You asked if you could bring the 300 Wisdom again. We said no.
Could you fight a war with it? Yes.
Okay, if we're going back to the original conversation, yes. And so he said no, but in the family we do have, and this is the information that he provided, a U.S. Army 4570 1893. It was owned by Colonel Blake, my grandma Martha's second husband, my dad's stepfather. Fought in the Spanish-American War, and it was given to me by my grandma Martha.
Okay, that's pretty dang cool. Now we've kind of is that taking, I guess, in chronological, if you will, or I guess we haven't gone in chronological order because, like we said, Ian's was after the World War II time, but we're almost kind of going back. What kind of a gun is that? Is that a bolt action? Is that like
So yeah,
are you guys familiar with this?
So I did
no.
a little bit of research, and I was planning on leaning on you guys, but yeah, I believe it was a black powder cartridge.
4570. Yeah.
And I've got a picture of it here. My dad actually has it's got a bayonet with it. It appears to actually possibly have some ammo along with it. I don't know, Ryan. You take a look. I'd trust you to know a little bit more about it than I would.
Slight typo, though. 1873.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have one of these in the next room.
Do we?
Yeah. Single shot rifle, 4570. It's
It's one of these photos.
kind of a modernization of the 1861 Springfield, which was a percussion musket. So this was the adaptation thereafter. Again, Craftsman taking existent parts. We're just post modern industrial revolution kind of thing, taking an existing platform like the 61 and turning it into the 73. Very cool rig. Neat gun.
The neat thing about that one is, it's an example of a conversion.
Yeah.
I mean, they worked with what they had, going from a black powder muzzle loader to a contained metallic cartridge that's percussive ignited. So that's neat.
The Spanish-American War was 1898. That's where I got that.
Well done, Mark. We'll come back to you, though, with our backup gun for you.
Perfect.
We'll have to talk about that as well. What's next? We're kind of leaning on Adam as our war historian here that we're talking to. What do you think comes in? Is it like the Lee Enfield before the M1? Do we talk about? Or?
Well, we do have the Lee Enfield, and I guess what would...
This gun is... We talked about it on the last podcast how I got it. I did acquire it in a mall parking lot that happened to be near a bank. Perhaps in the bank's parking lot. I don't know.
Classic Jim
Yeah,
gun.
got my prints on it
procurement
now.
right there.
Law enforcement in the area just said, "Oh, he's got a musket. It's nothing to worry about."
I did my best to do research on this. You guys will certainly almost have to correct me. Lee Enfield, this rifle has many iterations, and it's one of the longest standing rifles in use.
Period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It said, I read somewhere, and of course I'm sure that there's conflicting arguments and things like that it was second to the Mauser Nagant.
Correct.
As far as being the longest in use.
By like a real army.
Right.
Not like a warring tribe or whatever. But I believe if you still go to India, you will find Royal Guard and Indian, possibly Pakistani as well, armed forces with the Lee Enfield.
Very possible. Now, out of curiosity, when you see things like that, are they using rifles that are still manufactured to this day, or just rifles that have stuck around?
All
It's all surplus.
Okay. It was also being used by the Canadian Rangers.
Yep. Very
recently. They only just recently switched over to, and Ryan, or any of the gun nerds around here, you might know this gun. They recently switched over to a firearm that's a iteration of the Tikka T3 that is actually made specifically for them. Yep. I don't know what it is that's different about it for them.
The sight and the magazine, and it's their CTR, but it's got a neat open sight on it.
Yeah, primarily for bears and things like that, right?
Yep.
So, but this has had all kinds of iterations. The number and nomenclature system for the Lee Enfield has made no sense to me, because sometimes they seem to skip a number where it's like the number 1 Mark 2, and then it goes to the 4, or it goes from 3 to 5 or something like that. I was in all my research, I couldn't find some of them. And then sometimes they just felt like adding just a little star onto the end. And that was, instead of making this a new mark, we just going to add a star. This in particular is a number 4 Mark 1 with a star. And it is from Long Branch, which means that it was actually manufactured in Canada. And that, I don't know, I tried reading exactly why they were doing that. I think that they needed to just make more of these things, essentially. Savage actually made Lee Enfields for some time, and you would know because the receiver would have stamped or engraved or whatever U.S. property on it, which I thought was pretty cool.
As the war went on, they got pretty desperate in their manufacturing of both being able to make enough of them, like to crank them out fast enough, and then get the materials to make them too. So, like, as the war went on, things got a lot simpler. It was very evident in like Japanese manufacturing as well. Like in the beginning, they were really good, and then towards the end, it was kind of like, well, let's bend some sheet metal, and that's okay.
It was the bare minimum to fight.
They were very similar to a lot of the things we've talked about, where the original Lee Enfield was actually quite a complicated firearm to produce, and they started making it easier and easier to produce. So by the time you got to this the number 4, you had an easier to produce firearm. I think that just had to do with some of the various different cuts and ways that they were manufacturing the receiver and other things like that. Even the stock became more simple so that they could manufacture a higher number of them. They've had some really interesting variants, and this was one of the things that I was geeking out on. They have I'll set this down somewhere if somebody else wants to grab it, but they have a sniper rifle version that they actually chambered in 7.62 by 51. And there was a certain amount of them that, is only over like just over 1,000 that they made, that they brought them and they converted them, and they actually free floated the barrel. So you can see on this one, for example, and on all the other ones, they have where it's this wood stock that goes almost the length of the entire gun. It's got these bands that wrap around it to hold it steady. Again, presumably for the bayonet. And they actually free floated the barrel somehow on this. And it's a super cool rifle. I actually looked it up because I then became instantly interested in it. It's called the L42A1. And basically, if you want one now, I think they're upwards of $10,000.
Oh, wow.
They were mentioned in the same sentence as the Dragunov, which I saw once sold for $23,000, and then I was like, okay, I'm probably never going to have one. But it was cool nonetheless to see. It's a cool looking rifle too.
I'm going to speculate on that as time went on, that was probably an adaptation because they made a lot of these rifles for the war, and then when the war ended, they had a ton of them. And so it was one of those things where it's like, well, same thing with the 03 Springfield. It's like, well, we need a sniper rifle now. It's like, okay, well, we could solicit a new sniper rifle, which would take a lot of time, and you'd have to get budget approval. Or we got these old things here. Let's put a scope on that. Same thing like the M14 later currently used a little bit as a sniper rifle. It's not because it was awesome. It's because they had them.
Right.
No, really.
Now, another thing, too, with the British, I mean, the British Empire, what does it always say? The sun never sets on the Empire.
Because they were all the way to New Zealand.
Operated all over the world. So they have derivatives like the jungle carbine.
That's a cool
Which
gun.
is a little short job with a cone flash hider. I often look at it and I think like all the derivatives of the Lee Enfield are not unlike the modern M4 or the M16, where we started with this 20-inch, full handguard, and then we've got all the way down to Adam's favorite, the Mark 18, and its various adaptations and accoutrements that would go along with it. Well, the Brits were doing that, just after the turn of the century, just depending on where they had set up shop. So if they were in the the jungles of the Congo or somewhere or Africa, they got the jungle carbine for fighting in tight brush.
I think that this is a cool gun in so many ways. You have the action one, so the action was unique in that all these other bolt action rifles that we've described, as far as I'm aware of, they cock the rifle is cocked when you open the bolt. So when you open it, it's cocked, and they actually, most of them have a fairly long bolt throw. On the Lee Enfield, the rifle is not cocked until you push it forward. That's where then, at the rear here, you see this thing, the firing pins stay back. And of course, I'm probably butchering terms and things like that. But they were allowed. This allowed the action to be really smooth, and they could fire very quickly. And the idea there was that the soldier could fire without losing their sight picture very quickly. And some guy back in the day, and I looked this up, some British firing instructor was able to shoot at 300 meters or something like that and hit a 12 by 12 piece of steel, and he hit it like 38 times in a minute. And that was the Mad Minute.
The Mad Minute.
And the Lee Enfield would just mop up in that because it was so fast. Because when you would lift this up, it was a short bolt throw, and you would have essentially no resistance until the very end when you were pushing it forward, and then it would cock and it would go right into place.
You already got your momentum going.
Yeah.
It's kind of a spring-assisted opening, too.
It is,
when it unlocks.
So pretty cool. But they had, again, all kinds of different variants. The 303 British cartridge is also kind of an interesting story, too. Because from what I gathered, in their original development, they had to, I think that they actually, I don't remember what it was. They didn't like it at first, but then for whatever reason, their other option just ended up being a total shipwreck or something along those lines. And they ended up, all right, we'll go with the 303. They changed some things around with the rifles. Like I know at one point, some rifle, and this is probably where all of a sudden some historian is just throwing up their Cheerios because they're listening to me butcher their history. But at some point, the rifles were rifled. The barrels were rifled with a left-hand twist, and it was a different twist rate, and then they switched to a right-hand twist, or it might have been vice versa. But I know in these guns' history, they've played around with them quite a bit, and that 303 British round wound up getting a number of different, I guess, improvements and things like that. So it ultimately took the FN FAL to replace these, from what I've gathered.
Yep.
again.
And that lasted for a very long time as well.
sure
and
did.
still does to this day.
It
Oh, yeah.
sure did.
Remember when you used to be able to find FAL magazines under every rock?
No. But I wasn't looking.
Right.
This has a detachable box magazine, by the way. I can't even believe I didn't bring that up.
Yeah, the SMLE.
10 rounds.
Short magazine, Lee Enfield.
Yeah, that's why they call it the Smelly, the short magazine Lee Enfield. The original was just called the MLE, and that had some I think it was longer. That's why this is the SMLE, so it's shorter. I think this barrel is somewhere around 25 inches long. The originals, the MLEs, I think it's just called like Emily. They were around 30-inch barrels, I think.
Cool versions of this that were on the commercial scene for a long time. There was a company called the Gibbs Rifle Company that chambered an Enfield in 4570.
Oh, neat.
Nice.
Yeah, they came in a jungle carbine configuration, stainless.
Dude.
You want to check out, and they are a cult classic.
Dude.
If you want to check out a cool one, Gibbs Rifle Company 4570.
What were the stocks made out of?
They could have been a polymer or just an inexpensive, dark stained hardwood.
Yeah, full of oil, some exotic wood, yeah.
Yep. Teak-ish.
Yeah.
I do enjoy this rifle. I need to shoot it more. I want to hunt a deer with it. It came with a scope mount on it, and I was able to track down an original rear sight that I then installed instead of a modern scope mount. And now it's pretty much back to the way that it should be.
It's a fine rifle.
One thing I noticed right away is look at how much bearing surface you have on this guide rib up top. You know, it's separate obviously from the locking lug, but man, does that contribute to a smooth bolt actuation? Yep. There's like no binding at all.
It is one of the I own a couple of modern bolt action rifles, and this is still the smoothest bolt I have.
There might only be one rifle that's slicker, and that would probably be the 1903 Mannlicher Schonauer.
Here's a little bit of that.
Sounds slick, yeah.
Yeah, you can see that thing pop.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Huh.
Part of that has to do with the fact that the rifle is cocked.
Yeah.
So actually, once you pulled the trigger, it wouldn't have as much of that effect when you lift up the bolt. But once you let that go, it doesn't jump back on you so much. Yeah. But you can see that there's no resistance essentially on you as you're pulling it back, and it's quite easy to lift up in the short throw. So it's nice and quick. But
Jim, you ought to take yourself a classic British safari and bring your Lee Enfield.
I should.
I would bet that in many of the regions in Africa, you can still find some vintage 303 loaded with cordite.
That'd be cool.
Yes,
that'd be really cool.
It's a very interesting smell when you shoot it.
So what's the M1 Garand? We gotta talk about.
Essentially, that Mad Minute concept ultimately became the semi-automatic service rifle. Fun fact: you mentioned the detachable magazine on the Enfield. Mm-hmm. The original Garand design had a 20-round detachable box magazine.
You're a Garand pronouncer, are you?
Yeah,
Garand.
So he's Canadian. You're welcome.
Well, he's French. French Canadian.
French Canadian. They're the same.
I don't know.
There's more than one way of saying it.
They both call ham bacon, so it's messed up.
Well,
there's
true.
Garand and then Garand.
Yeah.
Oh, which A you enunciate?
Correct. And that's a big debate.
I guess I say Garand, but I don't really. I guess.
I mean, we mispronounce every country we invade, so
that's true.
You know what?
He was Canadian.
That's all right.
If it shoots 30-06 and it fought Nazis, I don't really care how you say it. I think we're friends.
That's correct.
If you like it.
Yeah, phenomenal rifle. Really long in the tooth, too. Its development began, I believe, in if anybody's listening to this knows the exact date, quote it, I believe it was in the late 19-teens. They started working on the Garand, or Garand, it's Garand. I did not come into accepted military service until the late 30s. Mm-hmm. So a lot of trial and tribulation to get this thing off the ground. Thankfully, it did. This rifle is still in use by special auxiliary units in the United States Armed Forces to this day.
What? Why?
Yeah. I believe it's historical significance in the fact that it shoots 30-06. So, if you go to a lot of military parades or funeral processions, you'll see that. And then I believe the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is still guarded by Garands.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
M16 just doesn't twirl the same.
Right. Nor does it quite have the same.
Nor does it go
pating. Yeah,
when you're
8
done
rounds.
shooting
8
it.
rounds and pating. Very cool gun. Top loaded with an 8-round magazine that was referred to as an M block. The soldier would take the 8-round M block and stuff it down the top. Hopefully get his thumb out of the way in time. Otherwise, you'd get what is affectionately known as grand thumb. That would hurt very badly as the very hefty bolt and op rod would move forward. They ejected out the top, and when you expelled the 8th round, out would pop that M block, and it would make such a romantic sound. It's ka-ching as it goes, and you hear it hit the floor.
That is the most freedom.
Yeah.
Let freedom reign. I feel like if there was a way to replace the Star Spangled Banner with just a series of M1 Garand
Going
off, then I would be just okay with that.
Yep. Super spectacular rifle, renowned for accuracy. They're a little bit on the heavy side. They're a tick over 9 pounds.
I was going to say, just looking at them compared to these, it's a little beefier all the way around.
There's some weight there.
Well, a lot of that has to do probably with the semi-automatic system,
Yep.
right?
And the receiver being this large piece of forged steel. There's a lot there. Really cool gun. I think if anybody thinks of World War II, they think of the M1 Garand. And I have to imagine that this rifle, the amount of firepower it represented, and how many of them were in service in the European campaign anyways, really pushed America forward.
Absolutely.
I don't like to think about the alternative, but 8 rounds of semi-automatic .6 out of a highly accurate system had to have been
Up against guys with bolt guns.
correct.
So explain why or if there is a difference between this and the M14.
There's quite a bit of difference.
I'm sorry, I don't even know if the M14 is the right word, but like the modern M1A.
Yeah, lot of difference actually.
There is, but they look so similar.
If you want to tease it, the short version on that story is, so they came out of World War II.
Okay.
They decided they needed assault rifles because of backup car here that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah.
So we need an assault rifle. At the time, the U.S. Ordnance Corps, that was a part of the government. The government, the factory that made these was a part of the government. And so there was another guy named Eugene Stoner at the time, and he had this thing called the AR-10. It was privately made.
When did he have it?
This was in the 50s.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, 'cause
That dates back to the 50s.
T65 cartridge, which was the predecessor to the 308. That was like 1960 or 1953.
Yep. So all the NATO countries got together and they decided 308 was going to be the thing.
That's what we're going to play ball with.
And then Armalite had this idea that went up against the U.S. Ordnance Corps' idea for an assault rifle, which was basically something like this. And they sold it on, well, we could reuse the tooling, and it's pretty similar, and it would be cheaper if we would just make this M14. And essentially what they did...
This at the... I don't mean to interrupt. Was this at the same time? There was a dude I was reading who made a semi-automatic variant of even the Lee Enfield.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
There's a couple of things that kind of like neat.
At the time, it seemed like everybody needed
the neat
to
notables
get this this like assault rifle, like you said,
like the Peterson device, kind of.
I think that was it. I think that was okay. Lee Enfield, and I'm probably. Oh, here we go. What is the Charlton?
Yeah, that would be the British counterpart to the Peterson device, which was for this as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which fired I think 32 ACP, something silly because it's the same bore diameter.
The Charlton used I think 303 British though.
Oh, did it? Oh gosh, they were.
It's an incredible looking rifle. It looks just like and like I said, I'm totally derailing everything, but look at that thing.
Yikes! Looks like a shot mixed with.
That thing looks angry.
Yeah, it does.
So anyways, but like you were saying, this is at a time when people realized that they need to shoot more bullets at the bad guys.
Yep.
Right. So they're like, well, we
quickly.
could put a detachable magazine on there. We'll shorten up the gas system. We'll rechamber it for the new NATO cartridge, and it'll save us money. Long story short, it ultimately ended up being such a big conspiracy that is the reason that the U.S. Ordnance Corps got shut down. Because it was basically a bunch of guys who made up a bunch of stuff that wasn't true to keep their jobs. And it wasn't the best thing for the American soldier. And that's why the M14 is the shortest service life U.S. service rifle that ever was. because it was replaced with the M16. There was a fair amount of conspiracy in that too.
Short bout of the M14 in the Korean War, right?
No, it would have been Vietnam.
Or Vietnam?
Yep, that would have been Vietnam.
Okay.
And then they had a bunch of them, and they still have a bunch of them, and that's why you see them still popping up. But that's because they're in surplus, so they could convert them to sniper rifles.
Is that like these crazy? We have one kind of.
Yeah, the
What the heck is that called again?
as an M14 would be the my buddy TK ran one. For goodness sakes, help me out here.
They got a crazy chassis
Yeah,
system.
it
all
uses
around
a
it.
Sage
It's all-
EBR chassis,
Yeah.
EBR SS.
They look amazing.
But they also the
way
M21
up.
sniper and M25 sniper.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, the M14 came out after Korea. This went on through Korea. My grandfather actually now passed away, was issued an M1 Garand when he went to Korea. And he has a fun story. He was not a shooter. I don't know that he actually fired a weapon prior to entering the United States Armed Forces. And he was talking to me one night about his rifle that he qualified with, which he qualified very well. And he said that the rear sight slid back and forth, so the windage drum on his M1 Garand was completely defunct and broken.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he fired around, and he saw that it went flopping all over the place, and he called for, like, hey, where did my round hit? And somebody was fortunate enough to spot. So he took an estimate or a guesstimate, and he manually moved the rear sight into position, fired. Oh, hey, that was good. Continued that for the remainder of his qualification, qualified well. And he said that was the last time he ever shot an M1 Garand. So he
shot-
did. Yeah.
just- oh my god.
And I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be like hand adjusting your reticle.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was about there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when he got to Korea, they gave him a pistol. He never fired it. And then they gave him an M1 or an M3A1 grease gun, which is really funny.
Yes.
Also never fired. So it was a cool deal. The Garand was, and spawned a lot of cool historical firearms. Really no relation to the M1 carbine. They just look
No,
kind of the same.
no,
They've
right.
got a rotating bolt and this neat op rod and all that, and they've got a kind of a similar rear sight.
You could say the same for like the Ruger Mini 14.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
Yeah, the Ruger Mini 14 is kind of a.
I would say a Mini 14 is
but a
probably
Mini is like a Mini M14, right? That's the whole.
kind of. I mean, if you like really get into the nitty gritty of a Mini 14, it's probably, I don't know if it's probably closer to an M1 carbine than it is an M14.
Yeah.
And now there's that cool gun that Ruger made that they never made, the XGI. If you
Looking
want to
it
see,
up.
if you want to see a cool thing, is the Ruger XGI. I've never seen one in person. I've only heard about them. I've only read about them.
What vintage?
Would have been I think probably early 70s.
Chambered in 308 or 243 Winchester, the XGI's function and aesthetics are influenced by the Ruger Mini 14, only sized up to the larger, more powerful calibers.
I've been waiting
Wikipedia never lied to me.
I've been waiting for them to come back out now into the 6.5 Creedmoor.
With a rare XGI. Oh, okay, I see. Somebody even has a YouTube video with it. This is interesting. I mean, yeah, it looks like a Mini 14, but it shoots 308.
Yeah, just truncated a little bit.
The large frame Mini.
So it's the big Mini.
Yeah.
The big Mini.
Very
The
interesting.
XGI.
So when you look at now's modern days Springfield M1A, not even the same gun at all. Not even close.
There's a couple of, they come apart kind
tell
of
you what.
similar.
If they're not even close, then I got M1A thumb one time.
Oh, you can.
I was taking apart that M1A that we now have in a Sage chassis,
I
and
do
the
remember that.
entire recoil op rod assembly
Yeah.
under spring tension went up and slammed me in the thumb from like full compression to full expansion.
And how did that make you feel, Jim?
My thumb hurts just listening to
Made me
it.
feel like I think I'm close to knowing what it's like to get shot, but I don't actually know that for sure. Of course, not at all. But
Yellow.
my phone's ringing. Anyway,
It's crazy.
but the M1 Garand.
A couple of variants that never did really actually maybe not make it to the scene. The tanker, Adam.
Oh, that thing's so cool.
Was it real? Wasn't it real?
I don't think it was.
So a shortened version of this chambered in 308. The tanker.
The tanker.
Yes.
For like a guy
Tank
in a tank.
cruise. Yeah.
To just pop out of his tank top, his Abrams tank and or Sherman or whatever. Yeah, probably Sherman.
There's
back
a couple
in that day.
of
I'm just throwing out names.
Panzer. There's a couple of
the old Jim Jenkins.
Yeah.
There's a couple of companies out there that make new M1 Garands, and this one's an old M1 Garand. That's just,
it is.
Yeah. Yep.
Why? It looks.
So this one's been re-arsenaled by the CMP, the Civilian Marksmanship Program, which is a really cool organization for you shooters out there looking to get into vintage rifles. The CMP, that's cmp.org.
You can get it delivered to your doorstep. Isn't that what everybody always says? Like, oh man, you just can get shipped right to your door.
Yeah, you can't. You can go to your FFL and fill it out though.
Okay. What was the deal with that? Why were people saying that?
I think like.
Well, they're like, you can add it to cart online, and they'll take your money, but they still have to ship it to a licensed dealer. That's what all the gun control people don't fail to grasp. Is like, you still have to go somewhere, and they still have to do a background check.
See, that's what I always thought. I always thought that's just way too good to be true. There's no way that oh well, if you just join this club, you can have guns sent to your door.
No, it's not like the Omaha Steaks thing. It's just not. It's
Omaha Steaks for classic World War II rifles.
Well, and one of the cool things about some of these service weapons of World War II is, again, how many of these they had to make. So most of the M1s you'll come across are Springfields, made by the Ordnance Corps at the Springfield Armory.
Oh, okay.
There were also other contractors. So you will find M1 Garands that have other names stamped on them, like
International
Winchester.
Harvester. Yep.
Yeah, H&R, and International Harvester is one of the more rare ones.
Are you kidding?
Like your Scout, Mark? You could get an M1 to go with your Scout.
Think of how fun it would be to shoot your M1 out of your Scout.
This may be the catalyst to start the restoration process.
All right, there it is.
Come on, Mark.
What's a rifle like this sell for in the CMP? This one's a Springfield.
Yep. So this one, the gentleman I picked it up from had it for quite some time. Very good friend of mine. I want to say he paid about $800 for this version.
When I was in firearms retail, we had a couple International Harvester rifles come through, and we sold them for just over $2,000.
Yep.
Interesting. I'd never
just
heard
because it has the IH roll mark on it.
Oh, okay. I think it's so cool when you look back at some of these where you see all these companies that got involved in the manufacturing of firearms and stuff, and just these war times just called for everybody to join in and just start making things for the military.
Yeah.
I was looking at the Lee Enfield just because that's the one I brought in. I keep bringing it up, but there was that might not even been the Lee Enfield. At some point I saw that Electrolux was involved in making
refrigerators.
Like a refrigerator company. Or just all these companies that you're familiar with now where they're they just make household appliances. They were making guns and
Singer
bombs.
sewing machines. The United States Postal Service.
What were they doing?
So I'm a 1911 guy still to this day, and that's the one that I was going to point out is Singer sewing machine pistol. Like the 1911 .45 caliber pistols, there were 7 subcontractors of that. The most rare of them being Singer Sewing Machine that makes sewing machines. It was a very small contract, and I think only 700 of them were believed to have survived the war.
Wow.
And I think now this is like the lottery of Grandpa's old gun if you find one. But I think currently they sell for something like $30,000.
Oh,
if you can find one, because they're so rare.
Yeah. You want to see another rare one too? If we're on the topic, find a .45 caliber Luger.
Yeah, that's the rarest. There's 2.
I think there's 2. Yeah, I was gonna say,
there's 2.
There's 2.
So for the solicitation for a semi-automatic pistol, when they were looking at the Colt, the Army said it had to be .45, similar to when Glock submitted their pistol for the M9 trials, and they said it had to have a safety on it, and Glock was like, nah. So,
we already got safeties, bro.
Yeah. So when Luger submitted his pistol, it was a 9mm, and they said, no, it's got to be .45. So for that solicitation, he made exactly 2 pistols, and one of them was actually used in the trial, and I don't know if it even still survived. I
believe it did.
Yeah, but it was there wasn't much left of it when they were done with it, and one of them was practically unfired.
It is beautiful.
Yes.
It's in a museum. It has to be, right?
Yeah, it's in a private collection.
Yeah, the .45 Luger.
Yeah.
What was interesting too, we get talking about like Enfields and Springfields and Craig Jorgensen and Hiram Maxim and John M. Browning, and a lot of these at the time of modern warfare, really around the turn of the 1900s, right?
Yep.
Maxim machine guns or Mauser derivatives, every country had them, right? It was like they went to the Maxim machine gun company, placed a bid. Hey, we need it for our caliber. If it was the Russians, it was 7.62 by 5.4R. If it was the Germans, 8mm Mauser. If it was, I don't know what the Japanese use, 7.7.
Something metric.
And it's just fascinating to think like that's how business was done at that time.
Yeah.
The war machine was powered by these manufacturers, these enormous titans of innovation that had what you needed.
And what else is cool is as the war went on in Europe, because a lot of weapons making goes on in Europe like for centuries. That's where these craftsmen were from. And the coolest gun I ever saw when I was in retail, we had a guy call in. He wanted some ammo for Grandpa's gun that he brought home from the war. We're like, well, it's probably 9mm, but bring it in, or 45, but bring it in just in case. So we make sure you get the right thing. And he surprised us, and he whips out a FN high power, or Browning high power, which was in and around this time too. It was used by the British, I think.
Yep.
But so
recently, end of production.
Yes.
So end of an era, ladies and gentlemen.
So high power. We're looking at it. You're looking at it. The manager, he's appraising it. He's like, well, what's a gun like that worth? Grandpa brought it home from the war. Seems to be in good shape. And my manager's looking at it because he's, a baby boomer. So he had a magnifying glass and he's looking at some proof marks on it and whatnot. And all of a sudden he looks up over the rims of his glasses and he's like, what side did you say your grandpa flew for in the war? And we're like, the Americans, why? And he turns it around and there's a Wehrmacht proof mark on it. During the war, the Germans overran Belgium, and instead of converting that factory, they just kept making high powers, and they started putting Nazi proof stamps on them. So there are high powers out there with
Nazi marks,
with Wehrmacht proof marks on them. That is the single coolest gun I ever saw in retail.
That's amazing. Wow. I feel like we should get into this guy, the backup gun that we brought. That's now going to be kind of interesting. So this is this is a replica of an STG-44. That's what I know it by looking it up. Mm-hmm. That's okay.
Sturmgewehr.
What the heck is
Germans
happening here?
Kind of sick of getting their butts kicked by semi-automatic rifles. They also kind of have this realization that we don't really need a 1,000-yard cartridge for modern warfare.
Okay.
It's kind of expensive to make them. They don't exactly have a lot of resources at this point in the war. So they're like, well, we could probably get by with an intermediate cartridge. And then they put it into a semi-automatic or a high-capacity platform. And then they figured out that they could kind of combine the service rifle with a submachine gun into one. And that was the quote-unquote birth of the assault rifle. So it was a service rifle and a submachine gun in one. Not the first version, because the Russians had one.
PPSH.
Yeah, that was technically the first. This is probably the first successful one.
Short bottleneck cartridge.
And
full caliber, though.
Yeah.
What cartridge is it?
So that was chambered in 7.92 by 33, or 7.92 Kurtz, which is an 8mm bullet, which is what their standard service rifle ran, right? The 98 Mauser was 8mm. But the case was much smaller. So instead of being Mauser, which is 57 millimeters long, this is 33 millimeters long.
You were saying earlier that was like the parent, or like this dawn.
Yeah. So take a good hard look at the STG-44, and then take a look at the AK-47, and you're going to see some things.
This is a 22 version, obviously, so it's slightly different.
You're going to see some styling cues. That are eerily reminiscent.
So like the gas system here above the barrel?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
The magazine.
The barrel style. The cartridge. The rear sight. The cartridge, the 7.92 Kurtz and the 7.62 by 39 millimeter, very similar looking. Yeah.
How about
primarily employed on the Eastern Front.
This looks like it could have been a stamped steel
It was.
receiver.
Very quick to make.
The AK. It's got a big. Actually, it's funny now that you're mentioning these things. Look at this big sweeping safety.
Yep.
So, and this is an oft-debated topic as well. A lot of people say, like, no, they were independently developed. I don't think so. I think Mikhail Kalashnikov looked at this and thought, I could make this better for less.
Have you seen the interview with him when it's suggested and he gets real hot real quick?
I didn't.
Yeah, he vehemently denies it. And,
Really?
Yeah, stamps his feet. And
I mean,
no.
It's just the rear sight, its location, style, shape alone. It's like, that's where it came from.
It's kind of it's a fascinating period. Like my attraction to all these firearms is kind of the stories that go around them.
Yeah.
So the war is ending. You know, the German war machine is collapsing, and everybody's like rushing to Berlin to take their piece of the pie, right? And everything's getting divvied up. The Iron Curtain is closing because communism is a big thing, and they don't want anybody anybody to leave. And East versus West, all of that. When everything was done and it was divided up, one of my friends at PWS kind of said he heard this. It's like in all of that, when they were dividing up people who were in the military for the German army, Americans kind of took everybody in the missile program.
Yeah.
Because the Germans were starting to have missiles. They actually had started developing the nuclear bomb or the atom bomb and all that. They took all the rocketry people and brought them over here and kind of hid that they were Nazis. They kind of like gave them different names and like, your name's Smith now, and come build rockets for us. The Russians took all the small arms guys.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I don't know for sure on this, but some of the influence was also German engineers that they took into Eastern Europe. And a lot of Russian small arms technology was derived from concepts that started in Nazi Germany.
You know why, if I didn't know any better, I'd call BS on that? Because look at an AK-47 versus a BMW. So BMW is like this Bavarian motor machine that's like super, super precise, and it's a BMW, and this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah, but it's a car.
It's very nice. It's a car, I know. Okay. But get a little bit of dust in a BMW, and it breaks down. It totally just catches on fire and explodes.
But it has windshield wipers for the headlights.
But look at the AK-47, and that thing is just a slop fest, but it works. It works in the mud. It works in the muck and all that stuff. I just can't imagine a German looking at an AK-47 and being like, "Yeah, that's good." I feel like they would just have a complete conniption if they saw it.
The interesting thing about AKs is like if you look at the ones that came out in the 40s and the 50s, and then you compare them to the ones that were made in like the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, big quality difference.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and the different countries that they were made
in? The OGs were like super...
They were nice.
Really?
Tight.
Yes.
Huh.
Very.
But then they broke.
Well, yeah. But
they had to not work right?
Well, as communism went on, like initiative kind of like... so like people who were making them, they're
bunch
like...
of tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people coming my way to kick my ass.
Yeah.
And that's how the AK-47 came.
That's how it came
there
around.
You have it.
So, but the intro about the Sturmgewehr is that it wasn't actually approved by Hitler to make. Like somehow somebody like stuck their neck out and made them.
Yep.
And then like some general was in a meeting and Hitler's like, "We're losing. What do we need to do?" And they're like, "We need more of these new rifles." And he's like, "What new rifles?"
Yeah.
But it actually came out too late in the war to make a difference. If it would have come out 2 years earlier, the end of the war changer. Might have been completely different.
Yep, might have been a big changer. Yeah, because compared to 9mm, it's a remarkably more efficient killing cartridge.
Yeah,
like the two of them are in very different parallels. And the Germans had brilliant submachine guns.
Oh yeah,
very
MP40 was awesome,
fast,
cool.
Extraordinarily
another
accurate.
gun that looks like it's made out of a car muffler.
Very controllable.
Yep. But this was a far cry. There could be a whole nother podcast on submachine guns.
I feel like, what we should do instead of this podcast is we should scrap the whole thing and just make it an hour long of just different World War II guns sounds.
Yes.
Just all of a sudden like an M1 Garand, doosh, 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 ting, and then an MP40 or whatever that one is that you just mentioned with that, like the, they just sound so cool. this is all probably coming from knowledge I get from Call of Duty and Medal of Honor.
That's how it's
video
pretty
games.
much.
I mean,
it's
it's
historically.
pretty
They're
historical,
pretty much
yeah.
historically perfect.
Documentaries is what
Just
I
a
call
modern
them.
textbook, really.
It is.
Yeah.
What do you say we jump into some last calls though on these?
I've got a good one. I've been
All
sitting
right.
on it.
I'm going to start mine because my first one I want to bring up is I know Ryan Muckenhirn loves integrally suppressed weird little variants of different rifles. There was a Delisle Commando carbine of the Lee Enfield. The commando units of the British military requested a suppressed rifle for killing sentries, guard dogs, and other clandestine operational uses during the Second World War. The resulting weapon, designed by W.G. Delisle, was effectively the smelly Mark III with a star receiver, designed to take a 45 ACP cartridge and associated magazine with a barrel from a Thompson submachine gun and an integral suppressor. It was produced in limited numbers for the British Special Forces back in the day.
Top shelf.
That thing looks so cool.
Top
it's
shelf,
a
gentlemen.
bolt-action 45 ACP integrally suppressed rifle. Man, I want one of those. Look at that thing.
That's a guard dog special right there.
The guard dog special. That's my last call. I'm just going to leave it at that.
That is cool. Look at that little forend too.
Right? Still wood stock and everything. It's just like
If anybody
tactical
listening,
as heck. But
if anybody
you just,
listening has a line on one of these, please get a hold of Jim at Vortex.
dude, it's this or a well rod that I would sell my life for. All right. Anyway, Ian.
No, I'm going to donate my time to Ryan because he can make better use of it for this topic than I can. So
You
all
brought a
yours.
phenomenal rifle, though.
Mine has to do with Ian's rifle.
Okay. Marco.
Man, all I got is gun history is cool, and guns make learning history cool. I've
True.
really enjoyed listening to you guys.
All right. Adam, you want to go last or do you want Ryan to go last?
I guess all I got is if you're interested in this kind of stuff, or you want to learn more about some of the guns we've talked about today, or other ones that we didn't get to, some YouTube fodder for you is Forgotten Weapons.
Is that like a channel?
Yeah, it's a channel, and he breaks down a lot of these, and he kind of finds rare variants of these and other Cold War small arms. So if you're interested in that, Forgotten Weapons or Small Arms Solutions, if you want to get further into the contemporary stuff. So
Nice. All right, Ryan.
War is hell. It's a terrible thing. It is what shapes our modern societies, and that's all well and good and part of history. But another part of this as Americans and for everybody listening is that this is what has gotten us to this point. And so if you're in your gun safe or in your father's gun safe or in your uncle's gun safe or your grandfather's gun safe, and you see a rifle, not unlike Ian's that he brought in, a sporterized rifle, I'm enamored with sporterized rigs, brought backs from various wars. I've had the good fortune of selling sporterized 1903s and Craig Jorgensens and Lee Enfields and German 98 Mausers. If you've got a cool one, I'd love to see them. Put them up on social media. That's so neat to see what came out of these terrible conflicts that then in turn fed our families, and that then in turn got a kid out hunting and got a kid out shooting for the first time. Sporterized, I think we could do a whole nother podcast on sporterized rigs because they're just so neat, the stuff that's come out for them. Cherish those old guns. They're not crap. Don't get rid of them.
True.
Yeah.
True.
if they're not sporterized yet, don't sporterize.
That's right. Don't. Then call me.
That's the other part of it. Sporterized rifles are cool if they're already done.
But such
It's not cool anymore.
such a huge piece of American firearms history and what we have today is bringbacks and what they allowed us to do.
Holding one of these rifles is way different than holding an AR-15 or something like that you just bought. Now, someday, I'm open to the fact that holding an AR-15 will be like holding one of these rifles.
That's
I
what
don't
I was
doubt
going
it.
to say. Someday.
I don't doubt it at all. But right now, when you hold one of these, it just feels different. You just feel the history. I look at this. Mine, I don't think saw a conflict. I see on the side, stamped on the side, it says 1950. But just the fact that 1950, and some of these guns are even older than that. Mark's gun that he talked about that unfortunately isn't here is much older than that. It's so cool.
Could have charged the San Juan Hill.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, There you have it. Now, as always, there will be folks who are probably huge history buffs in any one of these particular rifles exactly, and that's the thing you know the best. And if you know more than we do, or if anything we said was maybe perhaps historically inaccurate just a smidge, we'd love to hear about it. Let's keep it friendly. I don't know. There's no need to get mad at somebody or whatever, but I think that this was still pretty sweet, talking about some of the history of these rifles and getting down and dirty with these things. And again, yeah, everybody, if you're into guns and you shoot guns, if you say that you don't think guns are cool, then I think you're lying. I'm just gonna say it. You're a dirty, rotten liar.
Fair enough. I like
Let's
the
end on
accusation.
that.
Keeping it friendly.
Just
Like I said, keep it friendly. Yeah, exactly.
dirty, rotten liar. Click.
There you have it.
Do as we say.
We love you, though. All right. On that note, happy hunting and shooting, everybody. We'll end it on the classic bye.
See ya.
Bye. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.